And I never really got a satisfactory answer, nor did I do enough digging into it when people would tell me, well, there is no reason, or, they would give me a religious reason or something else, right? And they would kind of deflate me and I would move on. But it was really that question that set off the path. And I'll tell you what all started this. It was about 7-8 years ago now. I read a quote, which doesn't necessarily have someone that's attributed to, but it says something like this. My definition of hell is waking up on the last day on earth and getting to meet the person I could have been.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hirsch Redpun, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. My guest today on Truth Tastes Funny is Constantin Morun. He's a specialist in time creation and peak performance and a certified NeuroEncoding specialist. And he's going to tell us about his journey from communist Romania to a fulfilling career in North American tech industry, including a significant role at Microsoft, which shows his never-ending effort to get better, help people, and share what he knows. And that's the context under which I met Constantin was essentially at PodFest, where we were sharing notes on, on the medium, on what we can do to make people's lives better, essentially, because in the end, I think you just gravitate toward people that are heart-centered. If you're heart-centered and yes. Certainly on Truth Tastes Funny, that's what we always set out to do, was to create a pathway for self-improvement and also for attitude improvement. And Constantin, welcome to the show.
Hirsch, thank you so much. That's a beautiful introduction. And yes, it was such a pleasure to get to meet you in person at PodFest. And we exchanged quite a few notes, and then we kept in touch. And here we are recording an episode a few months later.
Yeah, and that's all the more exciting because you are an incredibly busy guy. Tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing. We'll go back into your story a little bit, but I want to hear what you're doing now and what's on your plate.
Yeah, so today you find me working in a senior technical sales role at Microsoft. I enjoy it dearly. I get to work with amazing people, both on my team and the customer side. But really my passion is with working with people and inspiring and empowering people on this beautiful journey that we call life, so they too get to shine their light. And I do that by having a show like yours, a podcast, getting amazing people to come in and tell their stories and dive deeper, but also through my coaching and mentorship programs. You mentioned I'm someone that specializes in time creation, as I call it, and peak performance, and I'm a neuroencoding specialist. And that's been taking up a significant amount of my time as I'm seeing people flocking in and saying, be like, okay, you know what, we want to learn some of the stuff you've got to learn and transform our lives. And that's honestly, Hirsch, the best feeling in life, because it makes me full with joy and fulfillment when I get to help others on this path. And as a result, I help myself as well, because I always get to learn from every single conversation.
Well, that's an interesting point. I find that a lot of us, and I've said this before, a lot of us gravitate toward the work that we've already done on ourselves in a way. I know we acquire all kinds of skills and we go to school and we learn and we have jobs and we apprentice and we're mentored. But it seems like there's a code that we're always trying to crack as a human being.
Yeah.
And if we have some success with it, we get excited about it and we want to see if it'll work for other people. Explain a little bit about your career at Microsoft and how this evolution took place to you sharing so much with so many people.
That's a great question, Hirsch. And for me, it all started actually back when I was very young. I think I was like 7 or 8 the first time I started tutoring and mentoring other students in math and sciences initially. And from there, it progressed into me becoming a coach, a soccer coach, and then a poker coach, and many other avenues in which I was learning something, get excited, and I would love to share with people. Now, Microsoft holds a dear spot in my heart because I've been with the company for 7 years. And as with any of the big companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, when you join the company, you join an environment that's very competitive and filled with high achievers and top performers. Now, I was coming from a startup organization that I was with since they had 10 people and then eventually had 200 plus when I left, which meant that they had a mix of talent, right? There were some people early in career, there were some people that were at the top of their game, and a lot in between. When you join a big organization where they have the benefit of being large and attracting all the top talent, pretty much everyone you get to work with is at the top of their game. So when I came in 7 years ago, I was like, well, it's time for me to step up my game. I've always been someone that loved learning and being challenged, and this definitely challenged me, right? I had a bit of imposter syndrome going in. I had a bit of self-doubt and lack of self-confidence in parts, even though they weren't necessarily justified. And that's what propelled me to really invest in myself. But the only way I really knew how to do that back then was by looking externally, because I've always been someone that looked up to mentors and coaches and parents and teachers and whatnot, and externalized a lot of that. And that meant I followed someone else's dreams for way too long. And it wasn't until a few years ago when I realized that, wait a second, yes, I have the American dream. Yes, I have all the things I want, but it doesn't bring me joy and fulfillment. I need to look inwards. And that's kind of where we are today now. I have done the work. I have found a system that works really well through trial and error and a lot of research and studying. And now I get to help others implement this system and see results in weeks and, just a few months.
So what spurred this on was kind of a hole, if you will, in meaning for you. You were succeeding, you were achieving, but there was something missing. Where did you go first? Where did you go to look for that?
I love the question so much. First of all, I've always been the type of person to ask questions and challenge the status quo. And with this one in particular, I always ask the question, it's like, what's our purpose in life? There has to be a reason why we're all here, because we're all different, we're all unique, and there has to be a reason. And I never really got a satisfactory answer, nor did I do enough digging into it when people would tell me, well, there is no reason, or, they would give me a religious reason or something else, right? And that would kind of deflate me and I would move on. But it was really that question that set off the path. And I'll tell you what all started this. It was about 7-8 years ago now. I read a quote, which doesn't necessarily have someone that's attributed to, but it says something like this: my definition of hell is waking up on the last day on earth and getting to meet the person I could have been.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, yeah, exactly, right? At the time, I was like, wow, if I go down this path, and I wake up on my last day, ideally in like 60, 70 years from now, will I be happy with the person on the other end, right? Like the person that will show up, will I be the same person? And it wasn't a trajectory. But it took me years to do anything with it, right? Like that kind of planted the seed and it started the entire thing. That's why for those watching and not listening, you see a sign to my right here that says, follow your heart.
Yeah.
And that's something that to your question from earlier, Hirsch, it's exactly what spurred all of this. Realizing that I wasn't actually following my heart. I didn't even know what there was in my heart. I had some suspicions, but I lived someone else's dreams, because society tells you, wow, you got to do this to be successful. You got to do this to be happy. My parents wanted the best for me. So they're like, you got to go study engineering and mathematics and computer science, even though those weren't my passions, right? So there's always someone external that, because they love you and they want the best for you, they'll guide you on a path. And unless you stop to ask questions, is this the path for me? What is the path for me? Then you're going to end up like me, which is most people, unfortunately, where you don't find as much joy in the things that you thought would bring you joy, and you don't find fulfillment in the things you thought would bring you fulfillment.
Yeah. And I think that, as a parent myself, I know that there isn't a magic, there is no silver bullet for happiness. There's no way to prescription for happiness that's super specific. Yes. There's love and support and encouragement. And if anything, I think what's missing, and you touched on it, is discovery. There's too little discovery. We think that everything is already formatted. It's like when you go in to write an article, and the font's already picked out. The type size is picked, the where the header goes and what the imagery will be. You're given 3 options. It's like
Yeah.
the discovery part of let's discover who we are as human beings is not quite there, and you're much younger than I, and so we're not the same generation. Tell me a little bit about your generation in the world and what you're seeing in the United States now that you're living here.
Yeah.
Well, you're living in you're in Canada,
by the same, it's
North America.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, and I love the question as well, because I thought that, what you expressed and what we go through, where we don't do enough self-discovery, we don't go inwards to find the answers, was rooted to a specific culture, a specific place in the world. Because I thought, Romania being a communist country where I came from, Canada being such a multicultural country, would be very different. But the reality is it's not. Because if you look at the schooling system, if you look at society, it's not teaching us how to think for ourselves. It's not teaching us how to look inwards for the answers. It's always about looking external and following the rules and following the professors and not challenging anyone. And I wouldn't say it's the system, but it's kind of our Western culture, so to speak. So I'm seeing the same thing across generations. It's getting better now with some younger generations, but still many places still only teach you how to follow, only teach you how to not challenge something that doesn't make sense to you, right? And I would say what I've got to see now, because I've been fortunate enough to coach and mentor people, as young as 18 to as old as 71, I believe was the oldest one. I'm seeing patterns across the age divide, and that's because of how society is built right now. And those people that step outside and say, you know what, let me challenge this, not in let me be rebellious and go against whatever the rule of the law, but more around like, hey, just because it's been done a certain way doesn't mean it has to continue being done that way. I can maybe find a better way of doing it. And that includes the idea of looking inwards to find the answers, because most of us have the answers within. We just don't give ourselves enough time. And then, things like our phones make it so easy to get distracted that you never have quiet time in your life, which is when you can start to ask questions, when feelings, emotions come up, thoughts and beliefs come up, and you can start challenging them. But we get so scared of that we dive into the distraction.
Yeah. And some of us go one way or another. We feel we need to go with our heart or go with our passions, or we need to trust the science, the rules, whatever it might be. You have all of this curiosity that stems from your background in mathematics and technology to psychology and neuroscience. And so there is clearly a heavy amount of scientific and mathematic study and expertise that you bring to your work with you. How do you see that marriage of all those qualities when you're trying to create time for clients and heighten their performance?
That's such a beautiful question, Hirsch. Well, first of the way, like you said, like I grew up in a scientific community and family, both of my parents being engineers, my father, having a PhD and a professor at university. So science rigor and sciences were a big part of my life. Spirituality didn't have as much of a role growing up, even though we were religious to some degree. And it always fascinated me to look at the human brain, right? That was my passion growing up and throughout life. But because I had, I'm coming from the background I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my family. So that's put me down the path of math, computer science, engineering. Now, what I see the value of science coming in is the fact that we have proof in front of us, undeniable proof from many researchers, many studies that tell you, hey, on average, this is what you can experience. Not only that, they tell you because of our evolutionary patterns or because of A, B, and C, this is what the human body does or doesn't do, which means that it gives you information to work with in looking to better yourself. So I'll give you a quick example. Negativity bias, something that you might be aware of, most people are. Well, if you start to look at the research behind it, it's easily traced back to our evolutionary patterns because, of course, until about 50, 60 years ago, it was very unsafe for us to be in the world. Between, of course, the poor living conditions where you could get a cut on your finger and just die a week later, or an animal jumping out of the bushes and eating you, or some other tribe attacking you, it was very unsafe, which meant that anything negative had to make it to your conscious mind really quick, to your nervous system really quick, so you can survive, to increase the chances you survive. So if we know that we are fighting negativity, essentially negativity bias, that means that anything positive will have a harder time reaching us. So unless we train for it, we can't actually dive deep into it. So then now you have awareness of this, right? So the science gives you awareness and gives you the confidence to say, you know what, this is likely what I'm facing, so now I can do something about it. For me, awareness is half the battle. And science provides you one path to that awareness. Spirituality provides you a different path to the same awareness from a different angle. But when you see the two of them coming together, spirituality says one thing, and then science comes in and says, yeah, I can back that up, I can show you the proof. Then you hold all the cards, you hold all the power. And that's what I combine in my programs, right? I start with the science. It's all about neuroscience, psychology, studies, a system that I've built, I've tested on myself and many others, and then bring in mindfulness, meditation, breath work, things that will just simply elevate your state to the next level, and you can achieve anything you want in the world.
My suspicion is that by doing it this way, you save people a lot of time, because if they're doing, if they're meditating, they're introspective, they're doing various, explore, soul searching and other things, but that without the balance of science and factual support and other techniques, it could, they could be wandering around a while, right?
Yeah, that's a lot, exactly, because there's so much, I don't necessarily call it fluff, but there are so many gurus out there that you hear say, oh, do this one trick and you're going to become a millionaire, you're going to become this person, right? And our mind tricks us into thinking that that's always the solution, right? So you'll, like you said, you'll jump around and get all of those, but it's all when it all kind of comes together when you get back first to yourself. And that's why in my programs and everything I talk about, it's all about your foundation first, which is your psychology or your thoughts and beliefs about yourself, the world, or others around you, because that's what builds up your life. And you can look at science again for this, where they've found that 95% of your thoughts and beliefs, which then lead to emotions and feelings, to actions and to outcomes, are done 95%. So 19 out of 20 are done at the subconscious level, which means you have no conscious awareness of it, right? Yeah. That's why you could go into a meeting with your manager, the meeting might seem to go well, he says or she says something, and then all of a sudden you start feeling a certain way, because immediately a thought or a belief came up because the word or the way they said triggers something. You don't realize it. It puts you into an emotional state where you are feeling less than. All of a sudden, you're going to take an action that's not necessarily conducive to the outcome you wanted, meaning maybe you feel defeated and you're not going to ask for the raise. Or maybe you feel like an imposter, you're going to be like, well, no, I don't deserve a bonus, so why should I bring it up? Right? So this is how we start losing time, by the way, because we're talking about creating time. Well, first, it's also about looking in and seeing where you lose time. Because as a high achiever myself, I've suffered with imposter syndrome, overwhelm, burnout, stress, hesitation, all these things. And they are the ones that steal your time. So I'll give you an example that you may be able to relate to, but many in the audience for sure will. Let's say you want to type out an email, right? And you're typing out that email. How many times do you read over the email if it's an important email before you send it? How many times you go back and refine it? How about if you send a text message to someone you want to date and you're like, oh, am I saying the right thing? Right?
Yeah.
That's an example of imposter syndrome as a symptom manifesting itself in your life, right? So that email that should take you 30 seconds to write might take you 30 seconds to write, but 15 minutes to refine.
Yeah.
So you just spend 15 minutes on something that can take 30 seconds. And that's because of your thoughts and beliefs. Because without you realizing it, you may have had a thought pop up or a belief that, well, if I say this way, it's not going to be good enough. Oh, but now I have this idea. What if I do this? And that's how this cycle starts without you realizing. And by the time you realize, it's already too late, because you have a lot of feelings that don't support better actions.
So that's interesting to me, especially because I'm a writer, and I'm constantly communicating. I'm a communicator. That's really what a lot of what I do. Most of what I do is listening and communicating. And when I have one of those really important emails, I don't know that I have a SOP for that. I don't know that I really am consistent. I tend to be inconsistent when it comes to these things, but I'll be like, read it over, read it over, read it over, read it over, or I'll be like, no, I just wrote this. I know what this is.
Yes.
This is it. Just go. Boom. It's sent. I used to have a business partner who would sit. We had a shared office, and he would, and when we were composing emails, he would be sitting there, and he would hit send, and then he would go, "Oh shit!" But he was just playing with me. He would just always throw that at the end. He would go, "Oh, did you send it?" I go, "Yeah," and he goes, because we get ourselves so worked up.
We do, and I love what you just described there, where sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
And there's no SOP. And that's what happens in our life, because we don't become aware of this unless someone points it out or we somehow stumble upon it. Because what in the example you described, when you send it right away without second guessing yourself, whatever the message was about, you're very confident, right? Perhaps the mood of the day was different, right? Perhaps what happened leading up was fine. But then when the time comes and you second guess yourself, it could be imposter syndrome, it could be self-doubt, it could be some self-confidence issues, right? Like not just yourself, but I'm talking about in general, right? Because that's what tends to happen. Because maybe you had a conversation 2 hours before this email you had to send out, and that seeded something in your mind around the thought or a belief, and that got triggered when you wrote a line that you weren't even aware of, right? And then all of a sudden, now it gives you the power back and says, well, if I don't know if this is happening or not happening, that means that that's an opportunity for me to ask questions and see why is it happening when it is happening, or why is it not happening when it's not happening, because both of them will give you valuable insights into who you are as a person. Because you see, things like self-doubt, overwhelm, procrastination, hesitation, things that most people suffer with, and especially high achievers, those are just symptoms. They're symptoms of likely a much bigger challenge that likes to hide itself below the surface. It could be a fear of failure. It could be a fear of success, a fear of rejection. That's a huge one for us human beings, right? And again, it goes back to how our race evolved over time, right? So we didn't want to be left out of the tribe and then die. All these things are at the root causes, but we don't really see them unless we dig. So part of what you said earlier, that's why self-discovery is so important, because unless you ask questions, no one else will.
Yeah, that's a great point. So before we kind of circle around to the conclusion here, share a little bit about Unleashing Thyself, your podcast.
Yes.
I want people to know to look for it.
Absolutely. And I'll put it here before we wrap up. I would love to have you on our show as well, so we can talk about building your personal brand, because I feel that's such a huge part of unleashing thyself. Because for me, the way I use this phrase a lot, I said, know thyself to unleash thyself. So for me, unleashing thyself is the idea that you remove the leash and everything that society put on you, but at the same time, unleashing yourself also means revealing and releasing that best version of you that deep down is available. So the podcast and everything I do is around that, about inspiring and empowering people on this journey to release that best version that they know is deep down inside. And they might not even know, and will help them get there, right? And I love what you do because it complements so nicely this idea of unleashing thyself, because as you get to know yourself better, well, you got to build a brand. You got to build yourself up.
I think we touched on that at dinner, or when we were talking about, because one of my sayings is that before you brand yourself, you have to know yourself.
Yes.
Right. Remember? And so that's very similar, except what you're doing is you're saying, okay, this is your essence, your soulfulness, your, everything that's really inside you. And I'm advocating the same thing, but from a slightly different angle, where I'm saying, you have to be familiar with yourself and not be afraid of, and again, like we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, twisting yourself into some kind of shape for some external reason, for the external judge of your happiness, when you're going to be the only judge of your happiness. So you might as well be the only judge of your output, your performance.
Exactly. I love that so much, Harsh, because like you say, it fits in. So like I'll add this really quick here when it comes to my system and how I look at this, right? The foundation is the first part, but that's something that once you really become aware of how important that is to your life and everything that you do, so that's thoughts and beliefs about self, others, and the world, that's going to become a cornerstone of everything you do, right? Because obviously, as you go through life, you want to build a grander and grander life for yourself, which means that you need to continue building the foundation to support the life you want and the life you deserve. But then the other three parts are so critical, and there's a bit of overlap with you, but they're also complementary so well, is getting clear on your why, your purpose, your mission in life, whatever you want to call it. Because most of us have an idea, but not really done any work to really identify that. And then as you do that, you identify your gifts and your strengths. Gifts are what those unique abilities you have from whenever you were born, right? Because we're all unique beings. And strengths are, again, abilities you've developed over time because of the career or vocation you were into.
Right.
And as you have a good foundation and you have clarity around the why, the gifts, and the strengths, it's time to revisit your vision and have a compelling, dynamic vision for your life across all areas, right? Financial and business and relationships and mental and spiritual and emotional, all of it. Right. And then once you have that, it's time to implement. And I feel like, there's parts in there that connect a lot with what you do, because it's all about having a beautiful vision and then executing it.
Thanks, Constantin. Well, yeah, and I'd be honored to come on the show. Now, tell our audience where they can find you so that they can learn more about your work one-on-one and otherwise.
Perfect. Thank you, Harsh, for the opportunity. First off, one of the new things I'm doing right now is I'm hosting live masterclasses or 5-day challenges. So by the time you hear this, you'll see a lot of those pop up. I do them every 4 to 6 weeks. The first one is on May 9th. So depending on when this goes, they may have passed, but there will be plenty in June, July, and beyond. And those you can find at calmsuccesslive.com. So that's the name of the events I host. Unleash Thyself, of course, you can find it on YouTube, any of the podcasting platforms. And if you want to connect with me, you can simply go to LinkedIn, Constantin Morun, or calmsuccesslive.com or unleashthyself.com. Any of those will bring you into my world. And I promise you, everything I do is about giving back, about inspiring and empowering you on this journey. And that's it. Thank you, Harsh.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.